What is up, everybody? Isaac here with Civil Engineering Academy. Excited to be with you on another podcast episode. Thanks for liking these. Thanks for subscribing, leaving comments, all that jazz. It helps us out a lot. So if you are enjoying these, share them with your civil friends, and we definitely appreciate that. So today I bring a special guest on. He's actually the husband of a previous interview I did with Kim Trong. She was a student of our course, was able to pass her PE exam, but has been living on military bases around. And so she referenced her husband, whose name is Jason Schechter, and he is actually in the military as well. He's with the Navy, working in the Pentagon on awesome stuff. So traveling the world as part of the Navy, you'll find out that we have 70 naval bases, and so these are treated like full-on cities with all kinds of infrastructure projects. And we talk in detail about programs that the Navy has in recruiting civil engineers, whether you're in school or whatnot, and helping you pay for your schooling while making a salary, the time commitment that you have to do with the Navy and all of that jazz, and really just his experience working in the Navy as a civil engineer. And he's actually a mechanical engineer, so that's unique as well. But he's a professional engineer, got his PE, got his master's as well, and has just done a variety of awesome projects all over the world. And we talk about his time also in Okinawa and why he loved it there so much. So anyway, it's a fascinating interview. If you've had any interest in joining the Navy or military and learning about the benefits of joining and how that can help further your career, then this is going to be one you're going to be interested in listening to. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and shut up. We'll get right to my interview with Jason right after this. See you in a minute. All right, Jason, we're rocking and rolling. Thanks for joining me today on the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. Appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. We actually interviewed your wife just recently, and she passed her exam. Wanted to bring her on to talk about that. But as part of that, she said it'd be really interesting to interview my husband, Jason, and kind of get his experience, because I think some of the avenues you went through may be opportunities for other civil engineers that they've never maybe even thought about. So I'm sure we'll dive into that, but maybe just to kick this off, give us a little bit of background about what you do and maybe how you got there.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a engineer in the Navy, active duty. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. My rank is currently a 05 or a commander, which is fairly senior, but not when you work in the Pentagon. But I started off, I went to UCLA for undergraduate school. Halfway through, I went to a job fair, and the Navy had a desk, and I just went over there to talk to them. My dad's prior Navy, so I was kind of familiar with the Navy, but I was like, what's going on? What do you guys got? What are you offering? And the recruiter said, hey, I got this program for engineers. There's actually a couple programs. You can either become a civil engineer or you could become a nuclear engineer. And now in the civil engineer, when I say civil engineer, they take all engineering types. You don't have to be actually a civil engineer. So I'm a mechanical as my background, and said, okay, let's check it out. They always say that recruiters, they always lie to you, right? But the funniest thing for me was when I first got in, I went to the recruiter's office, and they had a big picture. And it said, there's a picture of a guy on a bulldozer, driving a bulldozer in a big field. And it said, our engineers don't work in cubicles. And I said, oh, wow, that's awesome. That's a great way to advertise. And of course, the first day on the job, I was shown to my cubicle. But other than that, it was a great way to get into the military. First, 2 years in school, they actually paid for school. So I actually had a job. They would pay me as a soldier or a sailor, as well as paying for school. So it was quite a nice way to get through your last 2 years of school and not have to worry about debt or paying down your rent or anything like that. Yeah, you owe them. I owed them 4 years after that, and I always thought I'd be a 4-year guy, get out, go do something else. And then here I am, 20 years later.
Let's back up to that. Sounds like a benefit of joining the Navy was paying of school. Well, you said the first 2 years was paid for?
Yeah. They got a couple programs out there, but basically up to 2 years while you're in school, they'll pay you a salary and pay for your school. So you don't, you owe them some time afterwards. They do the same thing for some doctors and lawyers as well, which is a great way to go through medical school if you're trying to become a doctor. But for engineers, I think they changed the name now. Now it's called the Civil Engineer Collegiate Program. And you could Google that. You can find it on the Navy.com. And if you want more information, you go talk to your local recruiter and say, I'm interested in the Civil Engineer Collegiate Program. Or if you want to go to submarine and be a nuclear engineer, you could say, I'm interested in the nuclear program as well. But the Civil Engineer Program was, very interesting to me. And I was always the guy that already had a job, while you're in school, didn't have to worry about job hunting or, all the things that everyone's doing towards the end of school, trying to find a place to go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sure many people are interested in that, but just kind of high level, could you say kind of what that commitment looks like on the back end? And then you said it's paid, so is that, I don't imagine it's a huge salary, but it's paid. But what does that kind of range like?
So the first 2 years that you're in school, you get paid as enlisted. So like basically you'd be like, I think it's an E3, E4, which is, the scale of enlisted. And then once you finish school, you go to Officer Candidate School, which is a 12-week program. Now it's in Rhode Island, and you go up there and you basically learn how to become an officer. You wear the uniform, you get yelled at a little bit, kind of like an officer boot camp. And then once you're done with that, which can be a little painful, but, it's an interesting experience. Once you're done with that, then you owe 4 years and as an officer. And the pay is, pretty good, I think, compared to what you'd get on the outside as a junior engineer. I'd have to look up the pay tables, but they're all publicly available. But I think because I think maybe the Navy's or the military's salary maybe plateaus a little bit quicker than the private industry. But in the beginning, you're making, I would say, probably more than your counterparts, for the first few years, as well as some great experience.
Yeah, let's maybe dive into that a little bit. So, the benefits sound really, really nice. If anyone's going through school and you can get some of that schooling paid for, plus you're getting paid, I think that's super nice. What, so your background's mechanical, but the work you're mainly doing was civil. What does that look like? What is the work that you're doing in the Navy as a civil?
Sure. There's basically three kind of areas that a Navy Civil Engineer Corps works in. Either you're working in public works, so there's 70 installations across the globe, right? 70 Navy installations, and each one of these are basically a city, right? So you basically have a public works department, just like you would in a city, and you work in that public works department, either managing projects, infrastructure planning, utilities, everything that you possibly have to do in a city, you do on a base. And sometimes you do this in locations that are outside the U.S., right? So it's a little more complicated even sometimes. And then the kind of second area is on the contract management side, where you are basically a government contracting officer. So you get some authority to award contracts, negotiate contracts for the government up to a certain threshold. And then the third area is like the expeditionary side, which is more your traditional military. When you think military, you're in a battalion, a construction battalion. So you may have heard of the CBs. The CBs famous, I always point people to World War II, go watch the John Wayne movie, the Fighting CBs, the famous movie that's probably folks these days have never heard of, but quite entertaining. The CBs were kind of the people, kind of the force that led the island hopping campaign across the Pacific during World War II, building all the airfields, ports, all those kind of things that were necessary to fight that war. So you'll be put in a CV battalion. You'll be in charge of, a platoon, or a whole company of troops. CV battalion is like 600 CBs. As an officer, you're in charge of a section of enlisted folks. And you go do construction projects. Sometimes, I was in Africa building schools and clinics. During peacetime, we do a lot of humanitarian type work. During war, in Afghanistan, I didn't go to Afghanistan, but a lot of friends that did. We did a lot of, base building, basically, like going to the middle of nowhere and establishing a forward operating base, holding security, building barriers, those kind of things, kind of expeditionary type work. So there's quite a selection of work you could do, but again, it's not just civil engineering. It's civil engineering related, but as a mechanical, I've used my expertise. Fluids and thermal was what I tested in, right, during the PE, and so I've used some of that. Looking at when I worked in a hospital, for instance, I worked in a Navy hospital, and I was kind of in charge of the facilities for the whole hospital. As a young lieutenant, I was 28 years old, and they say, "Hey, you're in charge of this hospital when it comes to the facilities." That's a pretty big job, especially when you've never worked in a hospital before, right? And but being a mechanical, I was able to talk to all the HVAC issues, all the medical gas issues in the hospital, all the chillers, the absorption chillers we got. It was steam absorption. We've got backup generator power that we'd work on. We've got liquid oxygen, tanks, and all those kind of specialty areas that they're related to facilities, but are really just all aspects of engineering, really. So,
man, that's amazing. Has there been a favorite location that you enjoyed serving?
Absolutely. I loved Japan. I've been there twice. So I've spent 4 years there, 2 years back in 2014. And then I just recently got back from there in 2021. I was there in mainland and then also in Okinawa. So got the island life as well as the city life. Beautiful place to live, beautiful culture, and tons of opportunity, when it comes to work. So.
Do you speak the language? Do you speak Japanese?
I don't. I took classes, but not fluent. It's funny you say that, though, because the Navy did send me to school for French back in 2008. Wow. I was going to an expeditionary job, and this is not very common, but I was going to an expeditionary job, and they said, "Hey, we got space at the Defense Language Institute. Do you want to learn French?" And I said, "Sure, take me to French." So I learned French, and then I actually ended up using it. I went to Haiti. I was in Haiti right after the earthquake in 2011.
Port-au-Prince.
I was there, 2 days after the earthquake. It was January 12th, I think, was the earthquake, right? And I was there 2 days afterwards, doing a lot of assessments, so looking at buildings and saying, I'm not a civil or structural, but I was probably better than what they had. So I was like, look at these buildings, look for major structural deficiencies and say, hey, that thing, I would not send anyone in that building. You guys should probably stay out of it. That kind of
masonry.
Yeah, a lot of really bad.
Unreinforced.
A lot of it was reinforced, but with like welded wire fabric instead of rebar, and then they used too much. The stones they used were all like river rock. It's a real smooth stone, so the aggregate is just not holding the concrete together. And in some cases, even the cement they used wasn't great. So sometimes you could pick it up and you could actually break it in your hand, and you said, "This is, this does not mean any. No, this is not your 3,000 psi spec, concrete you can get here in the States." So
that's amazing. Well, wow. I just, the aspect of traveling all over. So you've been now there for how many years?
I've been in for 20. I've moved 10 times in 20 years. So basically every 2 years we pick up and move. So that's one of the kind of the downsides, or it could be an upside if you enjoy moving and traveling. And they say, join the Navy, see the world. I mean, you really do. They want you to get around, see all the bases, be different locations, and really, you get used to kind of moving a lot.
So when you're not moving, I mean, you have a home, I'm assuming, or do you just like, hey, well, if we're mobile, we would just want to be in an apartment or something because we're going to get called out in 2 years anyway.
Yeah, I've actually been one of those guys that tried to buy wherever I went and then try to turn that into investment and, later on sell it, rent it, sell it. And actually, it's actually worked out pretty well. Kind of slowly building up and over time. So you can still buy a house. It's definitely a thing. You just know that you may not be there more than 2 years the first time, and maybe you'll come back to it someday, or rent it out.
Makes sense. So what drove you to stay longer? Because you said it's a 4-year commitment. I imagine you could have gotten out and then done something else, but what drew your attention to staying longer?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times the Navy will dangle something in front of you that you want. Like you didn't realize you wanted it, and they say, "Hey, I'll send you to San Diego for 2 years. You can go serve with the Special Warfare Navy SEALs." And I was like, "What? Really? Yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great." Or, "Hey, I'll send you to Japan and you can go live in Tokyo, outside of Tokyo." So really, I think they're pretty good at working with you when you are about ready to get out, and basically give you a couple options and say, "What are you looking for?" If it's money, sometimes money is the motivator, and sometimes the Navy can't maybe, as you are senior, pay as much as some other locations, but there's plenty of benefits, to being in the military that are kind of non-monetary. And so those add up. And just really enjoying the journey, kind of being able to go see a new place, go experience something new, not stick in one place for 10, 15 years and get bored. So
I love it. And there's probably a benefit for staying longer, right? You said, can you retire after, is it 20 years or what's the number there?
Yeah. So 20 years is the current kind of retirement age as far as you get your pension. So under the old system, which I'm under, you get 50% of your salary as soon as you get out. You just get that forever. So until you die. And the new system, which is a blended system, it's closer to a 401k type retirement system, but it's still pretty generous. And they say it's not any worse or better than the old system. So they'll get a pension of some sort.
You could literally have a second career then, even if you served 20 years in the Navy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And most people do. That's the standard, right? Because I'm only, I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to stop working altogether. I could, but I'd probably have to move to the Philippines or something. Yeah, cheaper quality, cost of living. So
that's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about your roles. If people are going in as a civil engineer, you're an officer now. How have your roles changed as you've moved up in the position you're in?
Yeah, in the beginning, you're really working on the project level. They'll assign you, 8 to 10 projects, and you're really involved in those specific projects. But as you kind of get more senior, you start getting the leadership roles. Like you got people under you pretty quickly, and the pyramid is real, right? So you're getting promoted every few years, and you become more senior, and you get more responsibility and more stuff under your belt. Right now, for instance, I work at the Pentagon, and I'm the military construction analyst for the Navy. There's only one, and I manage the military construction budget for the Navy. So it's a budgeting and programming type job versus a tactical engineering project level type job. But it's $3 to $5 billion a year, which dwarfs kind of what you start with when you're doing a small project. Of course, I don't get to see any of that. I'm just the analyst. But yeah, it's interesting. It definitely the scope just gets bigger and bigger as you go up.
Man, what kind of skills have you seen maybe as a starting engineer versus as an officer as you've moved up? What are some skills that maybe engineers should be honing in on or being more aggressive on learning that maybe when they started, they just weren't polished on?
Yeah, I think, for me, when I first got in and I first got a project, when you're in school, they don't really, I took a couple of CAD classes, but it wasn't a lot of reading drawings, at least for mechanical. And we get a lot of, they throw a set of drawings in front of me and I have to figure out how to read them because I never really had a lot of classes on just reading them, not making them, but just reading them and understanding all the nuances on the drawings. So I think that skill is definitely very important, especially when you're not actually making the drawings. You're more of like the construction manager or the project manager on something. And then also being able to translate what you see or, engineer speak to non-engineers. Because a lot of times you're talking to your boss who may not be an engineer, or the installation commanding officer, for instance, who may be like similar to what you would call like the mayor of the city, right? He's not an engineer. So you got to be able to explain what you see, what you're doing in a way that they can understand, in very simplistic terms. I don't want to say like kindergarten, but basically you're gonna bring it down to a level that the most basic, anybody can understand. And I think that's definitely a learned skill, right? It's not something you do at school. It's kind of on the job, but definitely a very important skill.
That makes sense. What do you find is the hardest part about what you do now?
At least what I do in the Pentagon right now, probably the hardest part is going from, my last job in Okinawa. I was in charge of 1,000 people. I was the public works officer for Marine Corps Base Camp Butler, which is basically all the Marine Corps bases in Okinawa. I had 1,000 people under me. I felt like I was like, in charge of everything. It was really, it was a challenge, but also extremely, it was very rewarding. And then I got to this job and I have nobody under me. And so the challenge I have is it's a really humbling experience. You go from kind of thinking you're important and then coming to a place where the real important people are like, 4-star generals and admirals and in that type. So, just getting some perspective and this job is really more of a lesson in like major program and budgeting management versus kind of what I generally prefer is the project level. I really like managing projects and on being able to talk to the details, and I think is something I've had to really adjust to.
So, based on your experience, and maybe this applies to other people, but as you look to possibly retire, what positions would you be interested in coming back to, life outside of the Navy? And I'm sure there are other people that are listening to this that may be in a similar boat, but what's your thought process on that, on trying to, I guess, look for a position when you get out of the Navy?
Yeah. I mean, the good thing about the Civil Engineer Corps is that your skills are extremely marketable on the outside. Like there's a direct link to what we do inside versus outside. And that's not the same for us in the Navy, right? You could be in charge of a ship and it's a little harder to get outside and do something like that. So for me, I mean, I think I'm looking at working for an architect engineer firm is probably the top. I'd probably end up at like a Jacobs or an AECOM, one of those big AE firms. A lot of folks go towards higher education. Actually, it's also a popular route. Becoming a director of capital improvements at a college or university is also a great job. Or a hospital. I had some hospital experience, so I may go back to a hospital, do facility management for a hospital. But yeah, tons of opportunities. Really, you got to figure out what you want to do. What makes you tick, and then kind of pursue that. And I don't know if I've quite found the exact thing that I want to do yet, but I got about a year to figure it out. So definitely be, yeah.
Well, I've always wanted to ask people this, but like, I know you've got some unique challenges. Has there been anything that's frustrated you in working in the Pentagon and the position that you're in? I mean, everyone has frustrations in the work they do. Everyone does, no matter where they're at. But I'm just curious, what are kind of your unique frustrations maybe you're dealing with?
Yeah, just mixing politics in with business in the military is always can be frustrating because we get our money from Congress, and so we've got to work with Congress, and of course Congress represents their constituents, so they're interested in their districts. So sometimes what may not make the most sense ends up happening because one congressman or another is really interested in something. So we'll do a project because they've got so much interest versus maybe we don't have as much of interest in that project. And the bureaucracy is real. I mean, it's heavy. So you've got to learn how to work through that. And, it works. It's just it's a little slower than maybe most people would want. And it's basically just a really large corporation, right? So some people don't want to work for large corporations for that exact reason. They want to work for a small company because they can get stuff done quick. There's less procedures involved, less rules. So it's kind of basically your big company versus small company kind of mentality, and that's kind of how I look at it.
That's very interesting. And I'm curious, a lot of our viewers, time we're recording this, we're in election season. Does much change when there is a change of, I'm not predicting anything, but if there is ever a change of presidency, how does that affect what you're doing on the daily?
Yeah, so it doesn't affect me too much on the daily, but basically there are a bunch of appointed positions in the Pentagon, and those folks may or may not rotate out, right? So they get a new appointee comes in, and those appointees will have different, goals or different prerogatives that they're going to follow. So our current, our current Assistant Secretary of the Navy for installations, she's focused on energy and resiliency and those type of things which are related to climate change. The next administration, if there is one, who knows, they could put a kibosh on the whole thing, or they could pivot and focus on something else. And so we've always got to be ready for that. And, and we in the military are apolitical, right? We don't talk about our political leanings, and we just kind of move forward and do whatever the administration kind of tells us to do. So that's kind of where we're at with that.
Okay. I was just curious about that, how those things change guard and things of that nature. But
yeah.
I want to back up a little bit. So if I'm in the Navy, I've got my bachelor's degree. Let's say I wanted to get a master's degree, but I'm in Okinawa, or I want to pass my PE exam or something like that. Is there an avenue to still do those things while you're still in the Navy? Do you have to do an online class to get a master's if you wanted to go that route? And what's the exam process if you're serving on a base? I imagine they have a way to do that so you can still earn your PE license. But kind of high level, how do you keep growing your credentials in your career while you're serving?
Yeah, great question. So the Civil Engineer Corps, first of all, requires you to have a PE in order to promote and a master's degree, and they'll send you to get your master's. So I was also sent to get my master's at UCLA after 10 years in the military, and they said, hey, time for you to get your master's. Went back to school. That's where I met my wife.
Wow.
In the master's program, and I chose civil engineering, the water resources program, just because I wanted to try something different. And they'll send you for a year. They'll pay for that school and pay you a full salary while you're there. So and you owe some time after that. I think it's 3 years after that you owe, as far as staying in the military. And then for your PE, they obviously, because it's required for you to promote, they really encourage you to take any prep classes you need. If you got to go home and study for a test, they'll let you take a little time for that. I was on deployment in South America on a ship, and I was studying, an hour a day for a good 3 months. And then I came back and took the test, and I passed the first time, and I was super happy. But if you're overseas, you could take the tests. They have Pearson testing centers, that type of thing, all over the world. And you can usually take that test wherever you're living. No problem.
That's awesome. So, there doesn't seem like there's a lot of downside to joining and getting all the perks of joining the Navy and doing this program. So is there any advice you would give to anybody that's considering joining this program, and maybe some tips you may have for them?
Yeah, I think, there are some cons, right? So the family situation is a little bit tough. Like if you've got kids moving a lot as they get older. We don't have any kids right now, but if we did, I've seen a lot of families have some trouble with it. It moves all the time. But as far as advice, I think whether you go into the military, you go do something on the outside, just really enjoy the journey, kind of the doing of the things versus where you're trying to go. Once you get to that end goal, you're going to realize that, what really was important was how you got there and the things that you experienced on the way. And I think that's kind of what, I've really taken from this 20 years is, retirement wasn't really the end goal. It was like doing all those things on the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, man, this has been awesome. Very insightful just to hear your perspective on things, what you're working in the Pentagon and this program. So if anybody was out there and they wanted to connect with you, is there a way to connect with you, or would you point them to go talk to some recruiting group that they could go sign up and do this?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think maybe you can share my profile, or it's just you look up my name, you'll see me in my photo. I'm in my uniform. But as far as if you're looking to actually join the military or get more information, go to your local recruiter office and tell them about the civil engineer collegiate program. Tell them you're interested. They're fairly selective. I mean, you can still have a good GPA. You gotta be a good student, but it's definitely doable if that's what you want to do, and definitely encourage checking it out.
Okay. And there are age restrictions too?
Yeah, I mean, the maximum age is like 36 or something to join the military. And then,
okay.
Yeah. But usually out of college is kind of our primary kind of focus.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Jason, thank you for doing this with me. Like I said, this has been an awesome interview. I'm fascinated by the program. I wish it was something I knew about when I was in school. So hopefully those listening can take advantage of this program and further your career. So appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.